morning, everybody. And we are back with the Bishop Car Chronicles. It is time for another broadcast of Renewing the Mind and the Body for a Healthy Living. And while the notifications are going out, we'd like to send a happy birthday shout outs to Georgine Murphy, to Harry Cecil, to Mr. Cedric Adams, to Miss Cynthia, to Mother Melba Ware. And if today is your birthday, I pray that your day is filled with many blessings, gifts, and love from all around, and that you enjoy as many of the sweet things as you desire. Just don't make yourself sick, all right? It's your day. Go out, celebrate it, live it up, all right? Enjoy it, all of it. It belongs to you. This day is yours. And so you've been waiting a long time for it to occur, and it is now here. So, hey, make the most of it. You deserve it. All right. I want to say thank you so much for tapping in, for tuning in, and good morning again to those of you that are watching. If this is your first time watching one of these broadcasts, I want you to know that they are to encourage you, to empower you, to educate you, to motivate you, to inspire you, and to uplift you to move towards your destiny, operating in the purpose for which you've been created, using the gifts that are within you. I can't tell you thank you enough for being a part of the Back with the Bishop family. I love you all so very much. I thank you for every red and blue dot, for every like, for every share, for every comment. It all means a great deal to me. So from the very bottom of my heart, I want to tell you thank you so very much. I thank you. And so, of course, today we are in transit, and we are with the Car Chronicles. So that's where we are today. And we're going to be talking about this week. I shared a little bit yesterday, just in regards to choosing love and what that actually does for us when we are faced with making the decision to choose hurt or anger. And so that kind of ties into the theme for this weekend. I shared last week about my response to the 4-part series, When They See Us. And so today I want to talk about my first part. It's not part 1 of the series because there's so many different layers. There's so many different dynamics in the series. It's a Netflix original. If you have not seen the series, I highly recommend and strongly encourage you to check out the series. It's a 4-part series called When They See Us, and it is directed and written by Ava DuVernay, and she tells the story, or retells the story, if you will, of the Central Park jogger attack in New York. And so it centers around the story of 5 young black men, and most of them are teenagers. They are under the age of 16, except for one. And it tells their stories from their perspective. All right. And so about what happened. And one of the things that, of course, we know what's been going on around this country. And watching, I saw another production by her called The 13th. If you have not watched that, I will highly recommend that you watch The 13th as well. But it's very informative. It's very educational. One of the things that happens in this series, When They See Us, it deals with police brutality, but it also deals with coerced testimonies. And this is something that has been going on for years, for decades, and it is now somewhat being brought to light. It's being surfaced in productions like these, in series like these, and it is causing, if you will, our justice system, our legislative system, our judicial branch, it's calling all of them to have to be accountable for what has been going on behind closed doors for a number of decades. And so one of the things that I learned is that 97% of the people behind bars, watch this, what I'm about to say, 97% of the people that are behind bars that are in prison right now are there based upon plea bargains. And this was something that I learned, that they will try to, the prosecutor, the DA, they will try to get a person to take a plea bargain versus going to trial, because to go to trial, it costs the state more time, more resources than what they have, more money than what they have and what they're willing to actually put forth. So what ends up happening is they offer these plea bargains. And looking at one of the cases from yesterday, it was saying that, a plea bargain, especially for a kid. Now, remember, these boys were teenagers. They were 14, 15 years old. Only one was 16 years old. And he so happened to end up being the one that they were able to hang everything on, or use as the catalyst to be able to prosecute the other 4 young men, because again, they coerced these testimonies. And he was only there to be in support of his friend Yusuf Salam, who was taken and who was arrested, and they were trying to get, again, these testimonies out of him. So you can go and look the story up. As Larry Reed Light says, it's Googaball. So when you go and look it up, you will see the story of Antron McCray, of Corey Wise, of Yusuf Salam, of what's the guy? Kevin Richardson, and Raymond Santana. All right, these are the five young men who were prosecuted, who were charged, who were found guilty. And what the state used, again, the state used these eyewitness accounts, which were coerced by police after being beaten by the police. And forced to make these testimonies. And so, therefore, when these testimonies and these videotapes were presented as evidence to the courtroom, and believe it or not, after watching that, you got to remember, this is like in the late 80s. This is like 89, around 92, when they were tried on court. So watching the video, you would have thought that they were actually being truthful, forthcoming, unbeknownst to the public and to the jury and to the prosecution, what happened to actually get them to go on record, to go on video saying what they did. And one of the things that was very eye-opening to me is that each of them gave their own accounts about what happened, and they were saying, making up these names that they were never made privy to before until coming into contact with the police, to make up these stories, to draft this narrative of what actually happened, so that they could be prosecuted. Because, of course, this case was becoming a high-profile case because it was about a white female jogger who was attacked by a pack of wild young men, or what they call wilding or whatever. And so it was very high profile because of the racial factor. And so there was a lot of pressure. Good morning, Mother Downsella. There was a lot of pressure that was put on the police department there in New York to really get this case closed and resolved. So what ended up happening is they didn't care about the young men. They didn't care about them being boys. And most of them were interrogated, watch what I'm about to say, without their parent or without an attorney. So this is one of the things that we must become educated on, especially if you have a boy that's black or brown. You need to become very educated about these things, that when you are interrogated, when you go into the courtroom, especially as a minor, you need to have a parent or guardian or an attorney present during the questioning phase. Teach your young men, teach your young boys that they do not and should not answer any questions without the presence of their parents or an attorney. Hear me, because that's the only way, and one of the reasons why they were able to get these boys locked up, and they spent, I believe it's between 6 to 14 years of their life behind prison for something that they did not do. Hear me what I'm saying. They were innocent of the crimes. And one of the biggest pieces about this is the DNA evidence. It's the DNA evidence. And I talked about this before when we dealt with the Bill Cosby case and that whole issue of evidence. And the biggest piece of it was the evidence did not match. And so what ended up happening is the head of the sex crimes unit wanted to pin it on and say that there was another young man that was a part of it. So she said instead of there being 5 boys, there were 6 boys. But none of the other boys' DNA was found at the scene of the crime. As a matter of fact, of course, they were in the park, but they were at a different part of the park, in a different location of the park than where the rape actually occurred, where the beating occurred. And so when that DNA evidence, when that piece came back, which is usually, it's the strongest piece in cases like this. It's the strongest piece in cases like this. When it came back and it didn't match, the head of the sex crimes unit had a responsibility to relay that information to the defense, which was not done. But then also she had a decision to make to say, okay, either we need to look at this from a different perspective, we need to go a different way, etc., to turn this case around. But no, what she decided to do was push to have this pinned on these 5 young black boys. Now remember, they are 14 and 15 years old. And as I was sitting there watching this, and then I looked at a couple of other things. I was looking at the Khalif Browder case. His case was very similar to this. If you don't know the story of Khalif Browder, go and look it up. It's on the internet. It's the same thing. It's where another young boy, I think he was 16 at the time, who was arrested for stealing a backpack and ended up spending 3 years, y'all, in prison at Rikers. Come to find out, y'all, in New York is off the chain. They are a beast. And Rikers is a place that nobody wants to go to. Rikers is the prison that nobody wants to go to. So much so, I believe that Mayor de Blasio in 2017 declared that they were going to close Rikers down because of so much abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. All of this occurs there at Rikers, and not just by the inmates, but also it was found to be by the correctional officers. Okay, let that be a Selah moment. By the correctional officers, the one who are designed to protect and serve. No, it wasn't going on. They were exploiting the prisoners, exploiting the inmates. And so, now these are kids. They're 14, 15, 16 years old being put into prison with grown men. Let there be a Salem moment. Being put into prison with grown men. And it's like, of course, these mothers and these families are now forever torn apart. There are lasting effects on everybody. Nobody wins in a case like this. Of course, the victim, she doesn't win. The assailant doesn't win. The guys, the boys that were taken and put into prison, they don't win. Their families are affected. Of course, the prosecution is affected because now they have to fess up to the fact that they screwed up the case and they went after the wrong people while allowing the true assailant to still be out. And as a matter of fact, the story goes that the assailant was not caught until sometime later, and he ended up, I think, raping and abusing 2 or 3 more women. I'm going on about this, I guess, because I'm very passionate about it. Number one, because I'm black, but because you see it happen time and time again, where you have people that are taken because they fit a certain profile. So racial profiling, but then, of course, these kids who are impressionable, they are forced into making a testimony about something and admitting to something that they never did. And that's the reason why they ended up being convicted. And then looking in the aftermath, I think there was a testimony of one of the jurors who came forth and said in his mind, there was one juror, y'all, one juror who could have made the difference, who was in his mind, was questioning whether or not these boys did it. He was like, there are some things that just they're not adding up. They're not matching, and I just can't 100% say, yeah, these boys committed this crime. But he was pressured by the other jurors. So there's juror pressure or peer pressure. And so, you gotta watch this series and really learn and see what's been going on for ages. And these are things that are now starting to come to light because you have people like these 5 boys, and they're now grown men, and they're called the exonerated 5, no longer the Central Park 5, but they're called the exonerated 5, who are now telling their story about the things that happened in prison. And so, my heart really goes out because I have a brother and I have uncles and I have cousins that are in the prison system. And then, of course, learning how so many corporations are actually profiting off of prison labor. Okay, that's another story for another day. I've been on here too long. You're absolutely correct, Lady Vero. There are so many layers. There's so many layers to this, and so many of us are affected, and even we are affected. You and I that are watching this, who are working Americans, working in this country called the United States of America. Our tax dollars are going to fund the prison system. Watch this, we are paying to keep our relatives and our loved ones locked up for things that they didn't do. And the reason why we're paying, because we're forced to pay. Again, it's a system that is designed. It's designed, y'all. It was designed for the profit of those who actually own the land and those who are actually in power. People like the chief of police, people like the president of the union of the law enforcement, people like the prosecuting attorneys, people like the DAs. And of course, some of them didn't have the funds. And this was something that was just so eye-opening to me. And it's like, you got to watch the 13th. If you've not watched the 13th, again, it's on Netflix. Look it up. It's called the 13th. And it's basically saying that people who are poor, which is predominantly people of color, I'll say it that way. It's predominantly people of color. Those who are usually poor are the ones who end up in prison because they can't afford to bail out. And it was the Khalif Browder situation that really brought about a change to the bail system, bail reformation, because it's like, if you didn't have, and listen, his family, all they needed $900. I think his bail was set at something like, watch this, y'all, $3,000. I'm kind of mixing in too. What's up, Mo Steph? Good to see you, man. The Khalif Browder story is that he was arrested for stealing, quote unquote, allegedly stealing a backpack, and his bail was set at $3,000, y'all. $3,000. And he was a 16-year-old kid. And he was living in a house of other, 5 or 6 other siblings with a single parent. You know, his mom didn't have $3,000. So they set, I think, a portion of the bail, percentage of the bail ended up being $900, which again, she still didn't have $900. So she had to go around asking and begging and trying to raise $900 to get her son out of prison on bail, which she was finally able to come up with after asking people for it. But when she went to pay the bail, they denied the boy's bail because they said he violated probation, which they kept him in prison for another almost 3 years in Rikers. And again, Rikers is like the #1 worst prison in this country. You don't want to go to Rikers. Nobody wants to go to Rikers. So anyway, going back to the story of these boys, when they see us, you need to have a parental or attorney present when interrogation is going on. And watch this. Legally, you don't have to stay there if they have not charged you. But again, these are boys. They were kids. They were scared. They were hungry. They were afraid, and they wanted to go home. And that's how they ended up getting those boys, because they kept telling those boys, if you say this, we'll let you go home. If you tell us this, we'll let you go home. Now, again, imagine your kid, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. All they want to do is go home because they don't know what's going on. They don't even understand why they're there, because they're being picked up on something that they did not do. And I think it's very important for us to become educated about our rights, about the system, about what's supposed to happen, what should happen, what should not happen. And this is what I'm saying for us in part 1. It's very important for us to know, y'all, we got to become educated. Stop walking around, listen, just being completely oblivious, ignorant, blind to what's going on around us. And I'm encouraging you all to become educated like I'm becoming educated, so that we can continue to speak on these things, so that we can continue to educate our people, especially for those of you who are people of color. People of color, we need to become educated about these things. You're right about it, Most Steph, because we are continuing to lose. We're continuing to suffer. I'm talking all of us, you that's watching right now, you're losing, you're suffering, because again, if you are a working citizen in this country, your tax dollars are going to fund these procedures that are illegal, that are going on in this country right now. Our family members are losing, they're losing their lives. These boys lost a number of years of their living, things that they never got to go. Again, they never got to go to prom. They never got to go to homecoming. They never got to graduate from high school because they were locked up in a prison for something that they did not do. Let that sink into your mind. I got to get off of here. Renewing the mind and the body. Let that sink into your mind. Let that sink into your mind. Getting locked up for something that you know you did not do. And that was Khalif Browder's. And I salute that man. He is dead now, but I salute him, because at the age of 16, he found it within himself to stand against the judicial system and say, I am not going to admit to something that I know I did not do. And it's the same thing for these boys when they see us. When they went up for probation or parole, they ended up staying in prison longer because their conscience would not allow them to admit to something that they did not do. And the prison system says, well, if you don't have any remorse for what you did, then 9 times out of 10, you're going to do it again. So therefore, we're going to keep you in. But you can't have remorse. I love it. It was one of the documentaries. You can't have remorse for something that you did not do. I really hope that you all are becoming inspired to go and watch this series. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Keep your tissues next to you, because it is definitely a tearjerker when you see how these boys are treated. These boys are treated by grown men, by the judicial system, one that's supposed to be justice for all. It's so heartbreaking to see what happened to these young men, and now to see the lasting effect and the impact. They are still suffering behind this. They are no longer in prison. They are exonerated because the true assailant came forth and disclosed his witness, and his DNA matched the scene and matched the evidence. So they exonerated these 5 men, but they are still suffering trauma behind this, something that happened back in the 80s. Y'all, listen, this is 2019, and they are still suffering from something that happened in 1989. Do y'all hear me what I'm saying? Whole grown men. And there are still more like them who are still locked up, who are still waiting for their day in court. Same thing. It's a sad story about Khalif Browder. His case kept getting put off because the district attorney kept saying that they were not ready, and they were not ready because they could not find the witness. And it took a judge, after I don't know how many years, after about 3 years of saying, okay, if y'all can't find a witness, then we're gonna have to proceed and go forth. And the attorney knew that if they proceeded and went forth with the case, that they were gonna have to dismiss because they had no case, they had no witness, they had no evidence. They were going to have to let this man out, and they never charged him. Never charged him. Never charged him. And you know what happened? He spent 322 days in solitary confinement, where the United Nations has stated that if a person spends more than 15 consecutive days in solitary confinement, they consider that to be torture. Khalif Browder spent at least 322 days consecutively in solitary confinement. And what they said is that, and he's, again, y'all, 16 years old. His mind, his emotions, they're not fully developed yet. And he's in solitary confinement. He's away from people, away from human contact. So it broke him. It drove him to a place of psychosis where he was hearing voices, where he was being delusional, where he was depressed. Of course, they put him on medication. And so what ended up happening is one of the medications that he was taking, they said one of the side effects is it causes suicidal behavior. And of course, what did he do? He committed suicide, death by suicide, hung himself outside of his mother's house for something that he did not do. Y'all, listen, if that ain't enough for you to go and wake up and start becoming educated and teaching your young men, your young children about what their rights and responsibilities are, I don't know what else is. We're going to be talking about this for the rest of the week on this particular broadcast, because I want to encourage you all to, everybody's got to wake up and do their part. Everybody has to wake up and do their part. And one of the things that they said, what will make a big change, what's the greatest way and the fastest way to make an impact, is to push for trials and stop taking plea bargains. So, if you got a relative that's in for something that they claim that they didn't do, encourage them to go to trial and don't take a plea bargain, because that's what they said is that's the only way and the fastest way for this to actually, this judicial system that we live under, for it to be reconstructed and brought down and brought to light, is to stop taking plea bargains and go to trial. That's what they're saying. So I love you today. I hope that you've been encouraged, empowered, educated, motivated, inspired, and uplifted to move towards your destiny, operating in the purpose for which you've been created, using the gifts that are within you. If you got a black and brown boy or girl, educate them, encourage them, educate yourself, and be encouraged to know your rights. Pray for our young people. Listen, not just those. Pray for all of them. Pray for our young people. Because the spirit of hatred, the spirit of racism, the spirit of prejudice, it is still very much alive and active. Very much alive and active. And so I love you all. I'm praying for you today. And I'm just declaring and decreeing that as we become educated, not just awakened, but as we become educated, that we will go up. All right. What's coming for you and for me is better than what's been. Mad love.